Malware is a broad term for any malicious code, and in this video we're going to be looking at the origins of malware, the different types of malicious software, some of their features, what they do, how they propagate, the many faces they can take, and a few real-world examples that have changed the tech industry forever. And just before we dive in, it's important to note that malware often has overlapping characteristics or behaviors from multiple categories that we're going to be talking about. So it's quite hard to classify it under one single label. So just keep that in mind. But origins of malware. Where does malicious code actually come from? Well, in the early days, it was essentially created by highly skilled and slightly misguided developers. People who had deep knowledge of computing back when that knowledge was quite siloed to a small kind of tech community. There wasn't a lot of information or documentation or training available to help you get better at doing stuff with technology. So you had developers who basically crafted their own malicious code. However, as this kind of informational skill became a bit more accessible, the need to kind of write your own custom malware diminished a little bit. And if you wanted to attack someone, you could download some malicious code or malware that's been pre-built for you and launch it with minimal effort. So this gave rise to something that we call script kiddies. Essentially, it's somebody that doesn't have deep technical knowledge of computers or IT or security, but has enough technical knowledge to kind of be able to download, point, and fire. Now this whole space slowly started to mature with readily available exploit kits, automated attack tools, bigger and better, more mature versions of malware, and of course this just all accelerated the spread of malware. And even though there's limited knowledge, could now launch large scale attacks with relative ease. An important thing to mention alongside that is you also have organized crime and advanced persistent threats. So these kind of attacks started to move away from just projects and stuff hobbyists would do, like small scale troublemakers, to larger, more organized crime. And of course you have government funded, highly capable groups that attack. So these are your kind of 3-letter agencies, your various APT groups that often leverage 0 days and have cyber attacks more closely related to warfare and what's going on geopolitically. That's an important kind of bit to understand, that it was a very complex environment mixed with really skilled developers, script kiddies, organized crime, and advanced persistent threats. Now all of this creates a very specific environment. It's like an ongoing cyber arms race. So computer viruses and malware have evolved, and at the time I'm making this video, approximately 450,000 new malware samples are discovered every day. Now, while many of these malware samples are quite short-lived and only a fraction of them pose long-term risks or threats, the sheer volume just highlights the scale of the problem. This data pulled from av.atlas.org just kind of puts this into perspective of nearly 1.5 billion different samples of malware. And I know I've said viruses and malware almost interchangeably so far, but let me just explain the difference. So malware is kind of the umbrella word for any type of malicious code, and virus is a specific type of malware. And viruses tend to have two main features or characteristics. It's kind of why they call the virus a little bit like a biological virus of propagation, just spreading. And then there's the actual damage, or what we would call the payload execution. And this is the actual intention of the malicious activity. And this can be anything from data corruption to full-scale system compromise or takeover, essentially anything that would threaten the CIA triad. And as you can imagine, as antivirus tools advance and get better, the virus developers will refine their techniques, create more sophisticated malware that moves in a more stealthy way and evades detection. And this kind of ongoing battle has become the arms race, with each side kind of striving to stay ahead. How malware spreads: techniques of infection and propagation. So some malware relies on a human interaction for it to execute or spread. So this is like opening a malicious email attachment, downloading some sketchy weird software, or plugging in an infected USB. The trigger for it to kind of spread or infect. Now others, such as worms, spread quite autonomously. They'll literally scan and crawl networks and environments for vulnerable software, and they can quickly kind of rip through your entire environment without any kind of user interaction needed for them to replicate and spread. So now let's get into some of the interesting details about specific types of attacks and how they work. Starting with the master boot record attack. So the master boot record is the first sector of a storage device. So I'm just going to be using a laptop. This obviously applies to computers generally. But you've got to think is when you press the on button on your laptop, the master boot record is a small bit of code which is kind of responsible for identifying which partition contains the operating system and directing the system to load it. So in plain English, essentially it points at where your operating system is and loads it. So when you turn your laptop on, a bit of code says, go there, load this, this will start Windows. Now the boot sector is the portion of the partition that actually loads the operating system. And one of the earliest and most persistent forms of malware infection targeted these things. They would replace or modify these parts of your boot process, and basically you'd have malicious code executed literally every time you turned your computer on, and your system would always be compromised. So if they compromise a master boot record, typically would involve pointing to the malware to load first before loading the operating system, or a boot sector virus would infect the legitimate boot sector itself, embedding the malicious code or malware into the startup process itself. So these types of viruses actually take control before the system is even loaded or turned on properly. They are difficult to detect and remove, unless you're using highly specialized recovery tools and really know what you're doing. The only option is for a complete re-image, system reinstallation, start again, wipe that drive clean. Another type of malware is a file infector virus. So file infector viruses or malware embed themselves within executable files like a .exe, .com, .msc. Obviously this changes depending on which OS you're using. But basically what they do is they trick the operating system into running an infected version of the file first. Now there's other variations and ways this can be abused. It can be abused, something like a companion virus, which is kind of a sneaky, weird variation of this. So in Windows you have this like default execution order which prioritizes certain extensions. So it's like .com, .exe, .bat, .cmd. So if the user wanted to launch a program called something.exe, companion virus might create a something.com. And if you just wanted to launch the something without specifying the extension on the prompt, it will load the .com by default because that's a higher execution order. So it's like a simple but very effective trick. Another type of malware, and this is probably one of the most popular that I've seen personally, is macro viruses. So many applications contain like a scripting functionality that basically allows them to execute code. This is so they can automate repetitive tasks and do specific types of things within applications. So if you think of like Microsoft Word or Excel, they use a language called Microsoft Visual Basic or VBA, and these are macros. If used properly, you can do some really cool things with like Microsoft applications and help so much with productivity and yeah. But they also introduce a potential security risk. For example, in 1999, there was a notorious macro virus called the Malicious virus, and this was spread through infected Word documents, and it would essentially like spread, email I think the top 50 contacts in your calendar or in Outlook, and do that again and again and again. But I was 3 at the time that this happened, so I wasn't there to experience this firsthand. I've just read about it. There was another one in 2000 called the I Love You virus that spread via email attachments, disguising itself as a love letter, and it infected millions of computers worldwide by exploiting very similar kind of security flaws. Now these incidents kind of give you an idea of how powerful macro viruses are, essentially giving you the ability to write a program, some malware, have it embedded in a document that looks quite legit and just execute in the background. Now nowadays you get some big warnings and your screen almost flashes red when there are macros in a document, etc., etc. But they still remain a threat. especially with targeted phishing emails, because some spreadsheets require macros to be enabled or to be able to execute to run, because that's just how they were written or built. The last example I'll give for this video is service injection viruses. So these are malicious programs that use stealthy techniques to hide in legitimate system processes. And what they're essentially doing is injecting code into like trusted system processes, and the malware kind of disguises itself by doing this and makes it very difficult for security tools to pick up on it. The reason is like security tools often trust these core system processes by default, and they can just run without raising any suspicion. This isn't like a standalone malware file and doesn't really appear as a separate application or process, so it makes it very hard to actually detect it. Now I know we've gone over quite a lot in this video, but there's still a lot we haven't covered. So in the next video, which is going to be a bit like a part 2 to this, I'm going to be talking about zero-day exploits, diving a little bit deeper into virus behavior from multipartite, polymorphic and encrypted viruses. We're going to be looking at worms, logic bombs, Trojan horses or Trojans, and of course ransomware, maybe a bit of adware and spyware as well. And what I'll do is I'll try and tie all that together with some real world crazy examples of malicious code or malware that's done some serious damage, because there's so many stories to pick from and some of them are fascinating. So please like the video, comment and share your thoughts. What's your favorite type of malware, or what malware do you find the most interesting? And subscribe so you don't miss part 2. Yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.